Hello everybody, welcome to the Unix Linux introductory course. In this first lecture we're just going to talk about a handful of things. We're going to talk about what an operating system is, a brief history of Unix and Linux. We're going to talk about open source. We'll cover how you're going to set up your environment for working in Linux. And finally we'll cover a few basic commands. It's important to study operating systems like Linux because they act as the mediator between yourself and the computer, the hardware that is. An operating system is nothing more than a special program that allows you to make use of all the components that make up the computer's hardware. Just like any other program, the operating system is just a list of instructions. And some of the components of a computer, some of the hardware in a computer that the operating system is responsible for managing, in terms of managing our use of these things, those would be the RAM, CPU, input and output devices, and your hard drive. The very brief history of the Linux and Linux operating system as it relates to Unix is that back in the 60s, Unix was developed at Bell Labs, and in the 1990s, Linus Torvalds, a Swedish guy, decided that he wanted to make an operating system that would be more accessible to people for their home computers. And in the 90s, that was when home computers were starting to become more of a regular thing, especially towards the late 90s. And so Linus went ahead and started developing sort of a derivative of Unix, or something greatly influenced by Unix, and that is what became Linux. Since Unix was proprietary or required users to purchase some sort of licensing to use Unix, one of the reasons Linus created Linux was to have an operating system that people wouldn't have to pay for a license to use or develop. So he made it open source, which means that the source code, or list of instructions for this program, were made available to the general public to both help develop and to use, usually freely, in terms of not paying any money. It's not always the case with open source software, but oftentimes open source software is also free of monetary cost. Again, this is just a little more detail about open source. Okay, the environment you're going to be working in for following along with these videos and following along with the course will just be, we're going to be using a virtualization software called VirtualBox. And we'll be using that so that we can run Linux and not have to worry about making any disastrous mistakes. Any mistakes you make inside a virtual machine are pretty much quarantined within that virtual machine so that those negative consequences don't affect the physical computer that you're working on. So a virtual machine is just a sophisticated piece of software that allows you to run an operating system within another operating system. So you'll probably be using Windows, you'll be using VirtualBox inside of Windows, and then inside of VirtualBox you'll be using Linux, and specifically we're going to be using Ubuntu Linux. Within that environment, when we're using Linux, we're mostly going to be using the command line interface. And specifically, the command line interface that we're going to use in Linux is called the bash terminal. The command line interface is essentially a text-based interface where you just issue text commands, as opposed to what you would normally experience in, let's say, Windows. For most users, you're using some sort of point-and-click, drag-and-drop sort of interface. So instead we'll be using the command line interface, where we just type out commands to accomplish certain tasks. And now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate just a handful of basic commands to show you what it looks like to work in the command line interface versus the point and click that you may be used to on your typical operating system desktop. Alright, so the first command that we're going to try out, this is the terminal that I'm working in right now, typing in. And the first command that we'll try out is the pwd command, which is short for print working directory. What this does is give you the path to where you're currently working in. So in other words, if you were to be in Windows and you opened up some sort of folder and you saw the files that existed within that folder, that's similar to typing pwd and seeing the location where you're at. So you know that when you're in a folder in Windows, let's say, you know the location where you're at. You know that you've just double-clicked on some folder like Documents or something like that. So you don't need to type a command like pwd, right? But here, since we're working in the command line interface, pwd is handy because it tells us where we're currently located in the file system. So I'm currently located in the tau directory in this case. You'll notice that I'll say directory and folders sort of interchangeably. In Linux, it's more common to call a folder a directory. Another command that is very common and good to learn in the beginning is ls. That's lowercase l, lowercase s. And this command, ls, is short for list, and that just shows us the contents of our current directory. So it doesn't show us where we're currently located, it shows us what exists in our current location. So for instance, right, in my current location, which was /home/tau, right, we see all of these documents, right? Bidoku.py, animals, dogs, and so on, right? And we'll get more practice and more understanding of these different basic commands in the next video. For now, I just wanted to expose you to some of these commands. So another important command or helpful command is who am I? And that just tells you your username, right? So in my case, came up with this semi-cringeworthy username tau. Right. There's another command called cd, that's for change directory. Remember, directory is synonymous with folder. All right. So what I have to do, in addition to typing cd, I also have to type where I want to change my directory to. Where do I want to move to? Right. So I saw up earlier that I had a few other directories available to me. Right. I had this animals directory and dogs directory. So I'm going to go ahead and just cd or change directory or move into the animals directory. Okay. Now you'll see something changed on the screen. This here, this green section and this blue section next to it, is known as your prompt. The rightmost portion of your prompt, the blue section, is your current location. So in a way, that sort of makes pwd less important, because we can just get this information from this portion of your prompt. Right, so for instance, I know I'm in the animals directory because that portion of my prompt shows that I'm in the animals directory. But previously, it just had this little tilde, right? This little squiggly line, the tilde here. That's shorthand for your home directory. And indeed, I was in my home directory before. So I was in my home directory. I typed cd animals. Now I see that I'm in the animals directory. Now I'll do ls again just to see if there's anything inside the animals directory. and there's another dogs folder in there. We'll leave that alone for now. We're going to try out our next command, which is the touch command. Now touch, if a file doesn't exist already, if I type touch and then new file.txt, something like that, and I hit enter, that will create a file called new file.txt. If that file already existed, touch is just going to update some of the time and date stamps on it. We'll get to more details about that later on. Alright, so I did touch new file.txt, I ran the ls command again, and I see that indeed the new file.txt file has been created. Another important command that we'll use quite often in this course is cat. Cat allows you to view the contents of a file. So for instance, if I did cat new file.txt, you're going to see sometimes that it looks like I typed very fast. Really all I did here with the cat new file, I started to type in new file, and then I hit tab after the first few characters, and it does autocomplete for me. So you'll find that to be very helpful over time as well. Right. Now, I just ran cat new file and it looks like nothing happened. That's just because new file is an empty file. So I did indeed view the contents of new file.txt, but there's nothing in there, so there was nothing to show me on the screen. Right. So some other helpful commands, very helpful commands actually, are the man, info, and help type pages. I'll just show you a man page for now. Man page is short for manual page. This is just a tool within Linux that gives you a detailed look at how a command works and different ways you could use it. It's not going to make much sense to you right now if you're just getting started with Linux in this course, but I just wanted to expose you to what it looks like, and we'll get into more detail on what the man page really covers and how to read a man page in future lessons. For now, it's enough to show you that it's the man pages are typically set up in broken up into sections. So we have the name section, it just tells us the name of the command. Synopsis just tells us briefly how it works. All right. And then a brief description of what the command does. To exit out of a man page, you just type Q. Okay. And then a little bonus command that I don't have on the slide here is the clear command, C-L-E-A-R, and then you hit enter, and that clears your terminal for you. All right? Okay. So quick review of what we covered in this video. All right? Linux, it's an operating system, which is a program like any other program, but it helps users interface with the hardware. It's open source, which means the source code is openly available to the public. We're going to be using the terminal, command line interface, specifically the bash terminal in Linux. And we covered a handful of basic commands that we will be practicing over and over again throughout this course. Coming up next, we'll get into some more advanced commands. We will talk about the Linux file system and how it's organized. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a command is and sort of the anatomy of a command. So for now, hope that this was a helpful video for you. And if you have any thoughts or tips or hints or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll do my best to update stuff accordingly. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys around.